So thank you all for joining the panel today. It's really appreciated. I know how busy I am, and I think you guys are all a lot busier than me, so I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions for this panel, and thank you, audience, for whenever you're listening to this. I'm personally excited for this panel because we've got a really diverse area of expertise and lots of expertise. So the title of this panel is Maximizing Efficiency Throughout a Procurement Process, a look back at recent experiences and plans for the future. We really intend for it to offer advice and insight which the audience can take away and adopt some of it straight away. So with that, when we jump into introductions, and perhaps you can give you guys your standard introduction, but also maybe talk about your area of expertise, your current situation, are you working from home? And if you want to bring up any social good that your organization has done during COVID, why not do that as well? It's good to share some positive news in these times. So Josh, why don't we start with you?
Great, thanks Tom, and thanks for having me, appreciate it. So my name is Josh King. I'm Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer for American Water Company. We're the largest water utility in the United States, publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker AWK. Think water company as in the water that you would get out of your tap or out of your shower. So we get it from a very source, stream, river, spring, transport it to a plant, treat it, and then ultimately deliver it to homes. So we're in 16 states with customers around 16 states. It's definitely been an interesting time over the last 2 to 3 months. In my lifetime, I can't think of another event similar to this. Probably the closest one that I can think of in my mind is probably 9/11. But that was, obviously for a short period of time, but can't remember a long period of time like this. So, as a company, we implemented safety provisions to have everybody work from home beginning in mid-March. We banned all non-essential travel in early March, and we're still working from home right now. We are beginning to talk about, we're calling it reintegration, not return to work, because we're all working, but reintegration. So what's reintegration to the office look like? And I would anticipate probably within the next 30 days, we'll begin to phase into reintegration in our different workplaces. But most of us who can work from home are working from home. I'm based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and our headquarters is right across the river in Camden, New Jersey.
And how about you, Brittany?
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Brittany La. I am a senior patent counsel at Evonik Corporation. Evonik Corporation is a chemical company. We supply we have a very diverse portfolio of products, but some of the products I support are, range from silicas that go into toothpaste, to silanes that go into additives for paint, to polymers that go into medical device. So a very diverse portfolio, but definitely, definitely a lot of different products. I am currently working from home. Our company has shut down around mid-March, and similar to Josh's company, most of us are working from home, but the company is starting to look into integrating back to work. I mean, everyone, like Josh said, everyone's working, but looking for ways to safely go back to work once the shutdown is lifted.
Fantastic, thank you. And Shardul?
Hello, my name is Shardul Shah. I work with Abbott Laboratories. I work in the division Abbott Diabetes Care. I'm the global senior director for sourcing and procurement for both the direct and indirect materials. We've been working from home since mid-March as well. And we also are working through reintegration plans. We have our factories that have been running because of the essential services that we provide, and we will be, we continue to follow the guidelines that are given by the governments, and all non-essential travel has also been shut down. and we will ease ourselves back into integrating back into the offices slowly over the coming months. So thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you, Shadow. And next, Rory, and I think you're going to have a very interesting perspective because you have a lot of experience in working for a large company in the essential industry, but also now you've dived into your own ventures. So maybe you can tell us about your perspective.
Thanks a lot for that, Tom. Yeah, I think I'm slightly on the outside of this panel looking in because I really don't do procurement contracts. By background, I'm a UK lawyer and a legal engineer, which means that I build tools to help teams of lawyers and experts work better. I worked for a long time for a global reinsurer where I was a transactional lawyer, but during that time I also made the most of my time to re-engineer the way they worked around their contracts. Really not their procurement contracts, really it was their business contracts, in other words, their insurance and reinsurance contracts. And you know, one of the elements that we were kind of anticipating at that point was the idea of teams being thrust into situations where they had to work as teams, but in rather unpredictable circumstances. So in that sense, anticipated to a certain extent. I'm now a business owner developing my own tools to start businesses as contracts, and I'm a consultant in the legal engineering space. And in that sense, I'm not part of an essential industry anymore, unless you regard digitization as an essential process, which I guess is becoming. But very happy to be on this panel. And as I say, I think I'll take an outside-in view and maybe ask some questions.
Great, thank you, Rory. So finally, my name is Tom Eisner. I'm founder of CommonPage. CommonPage is a platform which users use to collaborate with their suppliers efficiently and eliminate frustration and confusion from those collaborations. So I think, you know, one thing Shadow mentioned was and Rory sort of followed up on, was the tagline, you know, essential industries. And so maybe a question to start for Shadow, Josh, and Brittany is, being an essential industry, how has that impacted your reaction to COVID? Maybe you could compare yourselves to some of your peers who are not in essential industries, because I suppose, you know, me as a consumer, I'm relying on you guys to stay open and keep producing. So how has that mentally shaped your reaction, and also from a business perspective, what extra pressures, etc., has it got on you?
I can take that first. I think because of the healthcare products that we provide, it's the government around the world where our supply base is spread out across. We're able to actually, I don't want to say run as normal. It's not necessarily normal, but we're able to run because the governments across the various landscape are able to get from us, or the suppliers are able to get from us, support that they're an essential service. We have suppliers that supply other industries like automotive, but their automotive operations may have shut down, but then the operations that they have in place to help with our healthcare operations stay open because we provide to them backing in the form of letters through government affairs to say, hey, you know what, these providers are essential to us, and they're essential to the daily lives of the people that we're serving. So that's where maybe we have conditions that help us stay open and continue to serve our patient base. Now, the rest of the organization, I wouldn't say they're running as normal either. I think we always have a slow moving, let's say, database management of where is our supply base and who are they buying from, and where do we control what they buy versus what do we not control what they buy. I think that's completely been changed. You know, coming from automotive where I was before, we knew everything down to the iron and coke and it went to the steel mills, and from the steel mills it gets slitted, and from the slitted it goes to the converters and goes to the stampers, and on and on and on. I think in healthcare we have more of a reliance on our supply base to ensure production is ongoing. And I think I'm not pulling my automotive experience in and saying, okay, actually, where does the resin come from? Where does the resin get refined? Where does it get compounded? All of these things are now being questioned and collated, collected. There's actually a bit of a change for healthcare, in my opinion, because they outsource so much.
So it sounds to me like you're saying then it's been a accelerant to making some potentially positive changes for departments internally.
For sure. I think the focus on supply chain and procurement in healthcare has always been, maybe it's not as heavily weighted as it is in other industries, aerospace, computers. Dell uses procurement pretty heavily. Maybe Procter & Gamble from a consumer product goods standpoint, or automotive, where procurement tends to be kind of king, actually. But in healthcare, it's kind of less heavily weighted in terms of part of the cycle. But all of a sudden, COVID-19 kind of accelerated procurement and supply chain straight to the top, which instead of distribution and sales and reimbursed markets, it all of a sudden became, well, wait a minute, how do we actually make this stuff? And so I think what we're trying to figure out now is that balance, right? How much do we have invested in resources to actually support that side? It's turned the discussion on its head, which is actually good for a guy like me who came in here trying to make changes in the healthcare industry that didn't really look at it that way. It's always the catastrophe that brings the attention. So
definitely. How about you, Josh? Compare, contrast to your experiences.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. So when you think about American Water and you think about what we do, you know, I don't want to sound arrogant when I say this, but we're always an essential business. If you think about the product that we provide, clean, safe, reliable drinking water to sustain life, that's always been an essential business. And so for us, it's doing the same thing that we do, the fundamentals of what we do well, you know, on a consistent basis. And so, you know, as the head of supply chain for that business, it's always been about, you know, how do we get what we need to supply that drinking water? You know, I think there's little nuances with our business that have been, you know, a little challenging or challenged. It's been, how do we get the PPE? How do we get the cleaning supplies to keep our employees who are out in the field safe? You know, for me, that was one of my big, I'll call it concerns, was that if we have employees begin to go down, then how do we support plants? How do we support operations, right? Operations, we're beginning to look at things like, how can we remotely support plants? How can we take, you know, and work in various teams and shifts? How do we mentor operators who aren't necessarily as proficient as more senior operators, right? So supply chain operations, we really team together to be successful in this crisis, but it really isn't any difference from what we do on a regular basis, right? It's just doing the fundamentals of what we do well. I'll say with the nuances of the fact that everybody is competing for the same supplies, really from a PPE perspective, that we're competing for right now. The other nuances of our business that were maybe a little challenged were, if you think about what we do as a utility, it's not just providing water, but it's also having the infrastructure in place to be able to provide that water as well. So the way I like to say, what I typically like to say about utilities are, to a certain extent, we're construction companies that deliver product. So we are a construction company that delivers water, and we're a construction company in that we have to build infrastructure, we have to continue to do maintenance on infrastructure, and we have to make sure that infrastructure is reliable. So that was definitely a challenge right now was ensuring that all of our folks can continue to keep up with our capital projects, that they can do capital projects in public domains safely, because if we fall behind on our capital projects, it ultimately puts, infrastructure and infrastructure planning at risk.
Josh, can I ask you a question around that? I'm very interested in this dichotomy between sort of white and the blue collar workers, or people in the field and those not. I take it that in your personal experience in this crisis, you've been able to stay at home and do your job from there. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, basically my entire team, from a procurement perspective, has been able to stay home. It's really the field-based workers that are the ones that are most at risk, that have to go in, to the plants or go out in the field. We've been doing things with those field workers, like, for example, where we would normally send crews out in the same truck, we've basically said, hey, one person per vehicle. We've actually rented a lot more vehicles now. We've been renting vehicles to make up for fleet shortages to ensure one person per vehicle. So from a white collar perspective, we've all pretty much been able to work from home. And really technology has been able to make that happen. I was thinking, I said, 10 years ago, I think with technology, even 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been nearly as efficient as we are now.
Sorry, one follow-up question, if I may, but this is exactly my point. And without wanting to put you through your end-of-year review, but how successful have you guys been? Because a totally successful outcome is that the numbers of people falling ill from in the white-collar community, the blue-collar community, is equal somehow, right? If you're providing the right PPE, how's that been panning out?
Yeah, so I will tell you that we have daily reports that come out internal to the company. Let me back up. First of all, as a company, we've put very strict measures in place for both our employees and interactions with the general public. So as a company, we haven't turned off, we've suspended all shutoffs for people not paying their bills. We've restored service to people who were previously shut off. If we have to go into a home, we ask the homeowner a series of questions, and then we make a decision around what PPE do we need to wear before we go into the home. Do we have to wear respirators? Do we have to wear masks? I talked about the social distancing with regards to vehicles. We've put placards on our vehicles for the general public that are telling people, hey, stay 6 feet away. And where this all culminates, I get a daily report, and we used to have daily calls. Now they've trekked back to about twice a week around employee COVID cases. And I can tell you that the number of employee COVID cases as a percentage of our population are very low, very, very low. Had they been field-based workers, I can't tell you because of HIPAA laws, obviously, but we've had very, very low numbers, under, 0.1%, 0.2% of our employee base has caught it.
Okay, well, that's great.
And is this a playbook which you had already established? What would happen if a global pandemic struck, or is this all just being created on the fly, so to speak?
Well, I think it's two things. So we never really had, I'll say, a formal pandemic plan before, but we do have business continuity plans. Mm-hmm. And over the course of the last, I'll really say 3 to 5 years, we have been working very hard on getting our business continuity plans in place, constant tabletop exercises. There's usually different exercises around viruses that are out there. There was actually, believe it or not, back in February when COVID began looking very serious, one of our business units ran a tabletop exercise simulating a virus and what that virus would look like. So we've learned a lot through it, but I think we had really good measures in place to help prepare for that. It's clunky, right? It's I think you start out with it being a little clunky, and then you get into you kind of get into the event and things begin to be a bit seamless. But I like to think that our customers have not seen any kind of difference in service as a result. And all the evidence is that we've been getting quite a few accolades from both our customers and by our regulators around the level of service that we provide in the crisis.
That's good to hear. So maybe moving on to something a bit more tactical now. Personally, have you implemented anything in your daily lives to sort of maximize your own efficiency for working, which you could suggest others do? How about you, Brittany?
On a more personal level, I think just being proactive to schedule my meetings, ahead of time so that I can coordinate, with all these, with home life as well as work life, because they kind of are happening in parallel, with homeschooling. We have 2 young children at home. So being proactive to kind of schedule things so that I'm not reactive to whatever needs out there, rather than having someone interrupt me. I mean, that will always happen, but minimizing the interruption by being proactive and scheduling it at a time where I'm most efficient and my kids are not, are either napping or, doing their own thing. So that's been really helpful to keep my sanity and kind of to work through this very unusual time.
Great. And does anyone else have any tips they'd like to share, or maybe ideas they've given to their team who they manage to work efficiently from home?
For us, we've had meetings that have gone. We're trying to keep every meeting to 30 minutes or less. Number one, because the number of meetings that it's interesting because people are missing those hallway conversations. They're missing being able to walk into someone's office and ask a question. And so there's been, I'm fortunate because I have someone that helps me organize my schedule, as you know, Tom. And so it's kind of like, all of a sudden it's kind of like 15 minutes if you want to get on somebody's calendar. And I think that's number one. Number two is everybody try to shut off by 5:30. Don't let it go beyond that. When you wake up and get on in the morning, that's your choice. But in the evening, 5:30, and after that, unless there's something really, really critical, you don't have to. And procurement staff, much like Josh was talking, is we're not necessarily essential in the sense that we don't have to be in the office. And so as the restrictions ease, I'm talking to our team and saying, look, I think we don't want to overstress a considerable stress that the system may have, and let the people who need to get into the labs and the people who need to get into, fabricating or doing research and development get in there, and let's not stress the system. So I think that's one of the things that we're also working through. So thanks to technology, like Josh said, that's super helpful. The one thing that I think we're missing is because we're procurement and sourcing, the directive I always give to my team is get to know the product that you're buying, and that means you have to have kind of constant follow-up. So the video chats are great, but it still doesn't let you stand there and watch the machine make something, or let you see what the reject rate is, and or see how somebody's taking the spare when something's down and going to put it into the machine. These type of things are actually very hands-on, and that's kind of what's missing, because there is a technical aspect to what we do, and that's a challenge.
Yeah.
So
I'll offer a thought, Tom. Building on what Chardol said, a couple things. So one is from a routine perspective, just been trying to urge people to keep a routine, right? And be respectful that others are going to have a different routine than you. For example, Brittany mentioned that two young kids at home. A lot of our employees have kids, and then 2 working parents. So how do you balance that, right? And we have some employees where they'll split their days up, or they'll even split their hours up and go, okay, this hour you're working with the kids on schoolwork, the next hour I'm working with the kids on schoolwork, or they'll compare meeting schedules together. But I've been trying to encourage people to have a routine and keep to that routine. The second thing is, initially when this crisis broke out, I mean, I would go downstairs and have dinner and I'd come back up and I'd have 50 emails. And there were times where I'd never have 50 emails after 6 o'clock at night, right? I'd be lucky if I would get under, 10. And so what I've been starting to tell people is, hey, let's shut it down at night. And if you do want to work at night, that's your choice. But there's ways to time your emails. So delay the delivery. You can do that in Microsoft Outlook. Have it delivered 8 in the morning or 8:30 in the morning or 7 in the morning, right? The next day. That way people can see it first thing in the morning. If you work out, try to keep to your workout schedule. I mean, for me, I just do the same things I did before, like, simple make my bed, right? Make your bed each day. Try to keep a normal routine, right? Those kinds of things I think are really number one. And then I would say, again, building on what Shardul said around, I really miss the hallway conversations, and I draw the parallel between, we moved into our new corporate headquarters in Camden about 18 months ago. And before that, we were split, at least the headquarters staff were split amongst 5 buildings in South Jersey. And I spent usually 2 hours a week in the car driving around from building to building to meet with people. And you missed a lot of conversations through just not running into people in the hallway, or you'd have to set up 30 minutes when really you could see them in the cafeteria and get what you need to get done in 5 minutes. That to me is going to continue to be a challenge. But I think and the same thing I tell my folks, we've got to learn how to take advantage of technology. We use Teams. So if you look at Teams, there's a lot of great tools in there around just being able to put a call in, being able to share a file really quickly, being able to bring up a chat really quickly. So use those, I'll call them non-invasively, but try to take advantage of those to keep in touch with your team. And then last thing is we also do virtual happy hours. And we try to keep it regular with virtual happy hours. So we'll do those every couple weeks, and we'll ask people if they want to participate, and we'll set up, we call them tables. And each table essentially is a Teams call, 6 people max. And then at the end of the 15-minute table, you rotate to a new table, and we do 3 or 4 of those, and we try to keep it loose. So
I think that's a very good point. One thing, so we're a small team at CommonPage, but when we're all obviously remote now, it's being deliberate about our social interactions. You can't just say, oh, let them flourish, because it's a bit like a tree which isn't going to get pollinated because there's no bees. You almost got to encourage that pollination of these social interactions, because there isn't those water cooler moments. So setting time out to have these happy hours is a great idea, I think. Another piece of advice which I've heard from someone else, which is working very well, is they're trying to cut down on the amount of email that's being used, and saying use the appropriate medium to get in touch with someone. If you can pick up a phone, pick up a phone. Send an email if it's appropriate. Use Slack if it's appropriate. Use Teams. But before you send someone an email or contact someone, just try and think: is this the right medium I'm using to connect with them? Anything you want to add, Rory, from your household?
Yeah, well, I haven't had a very normal lockdown period, I'd say, but it has been extraordinary for me and quite productive. But I can't say I've spent it needing to reorganize teams or experiencing the strictures of corporate life. But I talked to a friend of mine yesterday who runs a large team of direct reports, and she said something that really got me thinking. She said, in this type of time, you need to put more of your own personal memory bank aside to remember the private circumstances of the people who work in your teams. Because while some are getting on perfectly fine in this kind of lockdown situation, their kids are all happy and they're delighted to be home and they're able to spend more time with their kids, and it's all great, right? Some actually have home lives which can make it a bit more difficult in these circumstances, and you need to be quite reactive to that. And that slightly, it doesn't become your problem, but you have to be much more aware. So obviously being in their homes with Zooms and seeing their animals and seeing the circumstances, it gives you the opportunity, but you need to use that opportunity, and you need to use more of your memory for that, she was explaining to me. And I thought that was an interesting observation.
Definitely agree. So moving on, we've got people on this panel today. We've got Josh and Shardul, who I'd say, I put on a procurement supply chain, like frontline. You oversee the process from start to finish and then implementation. and you have a team of people working for you. But Brittany, your experience is more towards the end, your expertise is more towards the end of that process. It's when there's an agreement to be negotiated, a contract to be agreed, etc., etc. And Rory, I think that's more where your expertise is as well, in the engineering around the legal side. I think often in the past, Josh and Shardul, maybe you want to talk first, but there can be difficulty in going from that handing over to a legal side, and there can be dysfunction which happens there. Maybe not your organizations, but organizations generally. Would you agree? That there can be trouble in the collaboration between internal departments when negotiating, contracts.
So, I mean, this for us, this is something that when I joined Abbott 4 years ago, it's not really because of COVID. I think it's more because the way Abbott was set up and with the autonomous nature of how many P&Ls we have out there. Roles and responsibilities for contract management and negotiations was perhaps a mixed bag. And so trying to consolidate that and coordinate that into a more kind of a hybrid function, meaning that we're not centralized, but we're providing standardized ways of working. And so trying to follow that was part of why I came to Abbott, is to bring what I learned from my OEM days in automotive. COVID hasn't really exacerbated that. Like I said before, I think what it's done is everybody's kind of come back and said, do we have the right agreements? Do we have the right insurance? Do we have those type of things? Do we have the right protections for our product? Do we have the right protections for any investments we might have made for assets that may be placed in contract manufacturers? That's where the let's say the cross-functional part of this has been exposed, I guess you could say, because maybe before what we thought was a good insurance indemnification rate or a good confidentiality ended up being not good enough all of a sudden in the age of COVID. Much like Josh said, we didn't really have a plan for pandemic, and I'm not necessarily sure our contracts had a plan for it as well. For hurricane, for force majeure, force majeure it can be brought up here, but theoretically the insurance companies don't recognize pandemic as a force majeure. So you're starting to get stuck between these rocks in a hard place, and it's pretty interesting to actually navigate at the moment.
Brittany, you've got something to say. Any ways you think you can work better with your procurement or your supply chain teams, or with your business teams perhaps during COVID?
Yeah, I think it's not an issue unique to COVID, or it's an issue that's exacerbated by COVID. I mean, we definitely generally have, can improve on the efficiencies in terms of communication with the business line and legal. So I'm in the legal support group, so we support agreements and help the business get to the end of the negotiation. But definitely there are challenges in getting everyone on the same page. A lot of times, sometimes things are negotiated, all the major terms are negotiated, and then the agreement comes to us, and then we start to discuss and have to reinvestigate, are these terms really appropriate for this particular project, a particular agreement? So I think there definitely could be better efficiency and communication between the business and legal as early as possible, so that we explore all these areas before, things are agreed on by the business. And, I actually just have one agreement that I just worked on where everything was almost done negotiating. This is the opposite example. We're done negotiating with the other side, and then upper management has a different take on the agreement, and now we have to kind of start all over again. So I think having some tools or some more communication in whatever form it in to kind of get all the parties on the same page, so that we're not having multiple discussions at different time and starting all over again. So it's not really unique to COVID, but that definitely are places where we could improve in terms of collaboration with, different groups.
Okay, cool. Maybe Rory, I think, you've got like you said before, an outside looking in perspective, and I know you've got a great experience from different companies, small to large. What have you seen which works well to improve collaboration internally?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a great question, and I would like to echo what Brittany just said. This is not a COVID piece. It's generally people working around objects like contracts tend to be tremendous solo workers and managers of their own information. And often those types of people have problems staying consistent with themselves, let alone in combination in teams. So I think it's a pre-existing problem to do with mindset. I remember the company I worked with before, their legal department bought at quite some cost a repository for all the deals, because they didn't even have a repository of what they were doing. They bought this thing from a large UK law firm, and the lawyers immediately found out that you could just mark an individual deal as confidential. And they immediately marked all the deals as confidential, so that you couldn't do exactly what you were supposed to, which was provide the company with an overview of its own deals, and then be able to better delegate when things happen. So I perfectly agree from my experience with Brittany's interpretation that this is just a mindset piece and not so much a COVID problem. Although I guess if people are falling ill quite frequently due to COVID, then issues like delegation and having some kind of a corporate knowledge base instead of a knowledge base in many of these probably does become more important.
Okay, great. And just moving on to supplier and business collaboration, most of your suppliers are domestic in the US, I believe, and how has that been impacted? I suppose their ability to supply you and how you're collaborating with them.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit it, Tom, which is most of our suppliers are domestic. The way I was describing to someone else earlier today was that most of the raw, well, I don't call them most of them, but some of the raw materials are necessarily overseas, but all the manufacturing is domestic. Obviously, with things that we buy, they're global commodities, so there is pressure depending upon price fluctuations at a global level. But for the most part, we've been having regular conversations with our suppliers. Really, there haven't been many key shortages, I'll say. The ones that the biggest kind of shortage that would keep me up at night is in the chemical space, and it's because the chemicals are used to treat water, and if we treat water, we can't supply the water, and that'll shut us down. And so that's one that we really have paid close attention to. I think one of the interesting things in the chemical market is there are a lot of chemicals that are produced as a byproduct of other industries. So I'll give you an example is, something like CO2. It's usually a byproduct of the ethanol market. Well, when the ethanol market collapsed, a lot of the ethanol plants shut down. And as a result, there was a shortage of CO2. And depending upon the water source, we treat water with CO2. And so we have 16 water sources. So, it's not many. It's probably, I can count the number on probably my hands and toes that we treat with CO2. But those types of things are the things that, have me a little bit concerned. But again, we have very good relationships with our suppliers. And a lot of those relationships were established pre-COVID. And, in our space, in the utility space, we source, but I'm not one to source to constantly go for low price. I'm one to source, establish the relationship with the supplier, build a good, trusting, transparent relationship, talk about cost, talk about supply, talk about the pain points for each other, And then I found that when you establish those good, strong relationships in crises like this, we get moved to the top of the list for supply. And that's really our strategy, both pre-COVID, and we've seen it really pay off during COVID.
Interesting. And maybe Shardul, you know, you've got a lot of experience in automotive and now at Abbott. Josh's approach of not always going for the lowest price and trying to build a strong relationship with suppliers, is that something you've seen in the automotive world and in other industries you've worked in, or is it a bit different?
No, it is. It depends on the state of the company. When I joined Renault Nissan back in 2004, the state of the company was find cash and find cash anywhere. At the same time, drive sales growth. So when you're going through that, what my team and I established was a QC DDM approach, which maybe a lot of people are familiar with, which is quality, cost, design, delivery, management. And within that approach, let's call it 25 points, 5 points each. You can begin to reweight that 25 points. So at that point, that becomes not, you know, I think Carlos Ghosn, he said at the time it was more CQ DDM, which we're going to be a cost quality design delivery management company. And that was the basis for the Renault Nissan purchasing organization to take advantage of those economies of scale. I think when I joined Volkswagen, it became a bit of a different weight, which they knew they had to leverage. One of the biggest, you know, them or Toyota, whatever they argue to be the biggest car companies on earth, they use that massive leverage. But I think coming over here to healthcare, it's using similar principles to what Josh is talking about, but there's a reweight. Because we serve patients and who our end users are, design and quality get much heavier weights than cost. I look at, do they have availability of a well-trained and educated workforce? Are they, do they have the proper transportation and warehousing needs? Because we use a lot of different types of warehousing. Are they investing properly in machine maintenance? So the cost aspects are still important. Don't get me wrong, everybody loves a good margin. But on the other side, it's the weight that you put into that, because a lot of our products go into people. A lot of, you know, the product that I'm working on now that we've created sits on top of you, but there is still something that goes into you to monitor your blood levels for diabetes management. But it's a very different aspect of output that you're looking for from supplier selection and management.
Very interesting. And Brittany and Rory, I know organizations, legal teams will spend a lot of effort and energy trying to create a contract which gives them maximum protection should something like COVID arise. And maybe it's too early to tell, but anecdotally or from your peers, has the amount of attention which trying to design the ultimate contract which protects your company to the nth degree, has that paid off today, or is it maybe not paying off because you now finding you're relying on your suppliers much more than these contracts said? What do you think, Rory?
Well, you know, I was working mostly for a financial services firm, and it's different. You know, what are we sourcing? We're sourcing modeling tools, we're sourcing IT, right? But that's not our product. The product is essentially, well, a financial services company is just a bunch of people and a bunch of contracts. So it's quite different, I would say. Regarding your point about the sort of preparation, obviously insurance companies, which is where I was coming from, are delighted by how well they've prepared for circumstances like these, because basically you get products that stay faithful to notions in property coverage of physical damage, right? So when you have business interruption covers, which is what is a lot in the spotlight at the moment, they've been pretty religious in excluding non-physical, such as this virus, right? And therefore, you know, they feel pretty good about it. And a lot of their work is around trying to explain that to people. And there's a lot of claims coming out, of course, on the life side and on the health side and that kind of thing. But they were prepared for this from the outset.
And from my perspective, I mean, I don't deal directly with a lot of commercial agreements because I focus on IP, but definitely, you know, from our department, you know, our attorneys have definitely been dealing a lot of issues that come up because of COVID. And, you know, again, it's mostly the supply chain issue. Because Evonik is kind of in a range of type of products, so some are essential, some are non-essential. We are, in many cases, a supplier, but as well, we rely on, you know, materials to supply companies that supply us so that we can make, you know, the products for our customers. So I think only time can tell, because right now there's a lot of reaction to, you know, different companies. You know, some are claiming, you know, force majeure and you know, raising supply issues or you know, not being able to perform. Others, you know, we may have to rely on our contracts to say that we may not be able to supply certain things. So I think time will tell, you know, how robust our agreements are, but we're pretty confident. But it's more right now we're kind of in the mode of just dealing with all the issues that come up. So we haven't had a chance to kind of assess, but definitely a lot of reaction to, you know, all these issues that came up.
I'm going to ask Shado and Josh now to answer maybe a hard question in as few words as possible. But if Shado's talked about waiting, and if we can talk pre-COVID and post-COVID, or today, if you, when creating a new supplier relationship and a new contract, what weighting proportionally would you give to the strength of a relationship being the most important thing, or the strength of the contract being the most important thing? And has it changed? Who wants to go first?
You know, you know, it's funny because I guess coming from the automotive industry, I spent, you know, like 15 years there, and when we started going towards what was framed up in a more polite way, leading cost country sourcing, and which is basically moving everything from Canada or Western Europe or parts of the U.S. from a supplier standpoint to, let's say, East Asia, the Pacific Rim, parts of Brazil, whatever, etc. You know, the big argument became, okay, should we actually do that, or should we regionalize? And that's where Mexico became a big part of, you know, with the NAFTA trade agreement. I'd say the big thing that I've learned within COVID is that to invest in quality and continuity, because that ultimately is going to, I think the entire, it seems like supply chains got a second look all of a sudden as to, do we really want, you know, when we were making decisions even 15 years ago, even before the Lehman Brothers crisis in 2008, right? And I do call it the Lehman Brothers crisis. In 2003 or 4, we were thinking, why do we want products sitting on a boat for 8 weeks coming from China, or why do we want products sitting on the boat for 10 weeks coming from, you know, a lower cost country like Colombia or something? And do we want to regionalize things? So I think that we need to take a look again at the geopolitical nature of the relationships for the countries that we have most of our sales coming from. And I know that sounds a bit far-fetched, but if we're serving and we get most of our patients that are able to afford and have access to our products in Western Europe, then do we need to invest in a supply base that can support Western Europe, right? Do we need to invest regionally to help produce regionally? do we need to take a look at things in that regard? Because I think having multiple sites costs a lot of money, as Josh I'm sure can attest to. Having single sources makes sometimes sense because it means less investment upfront, and that means you're putting more trust in one partner. So that dual sourcing is becoming a very, do we need 2 sites? Do we need 2 suppliers? But that costs a lot of funds. And then of course, that causes inflation in the product that you're delivering. So a lot of things to consider, but those are the things that we're thinking about.
Fantastic. I really appreciate quality and continuity. Josh, quality and continuity for you over trying to lock people down with the world's most stringent contract?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, I think a lot of it has to be, a lot of it's industry mentality too. I'm in an industry where we're reliability based. Obviously, we do the best we can. Customers are at the center of everything we do. So we do everything in the name of customers. So we obviously try to keep customer costs down as much as we can, but reliability also has an important role to play. And so I have a brilliant in-house counsel, and she always says to me, hey, think of a contract as a marriage between basically the company and the supplier. And the contract is defining the marriage, right? And you never want to have to break the document out unless you're going to get divorced, right? That should be when you're basically breaking the document out. Everything else should be the same way it is in a marriage. You're giving, you're taking, you're compromising, you're building a relationship, you're building trust, right? And that's the way I view it as well, is that if you can have that kind of strong relationship with a supplier, the contract's great, but the contract is there as the last resort for if you're going to break up.
Okay, so then moving the question over to Rory and Brittany, if we're saying about, the contract we only bring out when we want to get divorced, it seems to me from an outside perspective that so much energy and time gets spent on negotiating the contract. Rory, Brittany, do you think there's anything companies can do to be more efficient when negotiating a contract? Is it mindset? Is it technology? What do you think?
Brittany?
I mean, definitely. I 100% agree with Josh in terms of, relying on the contract. We always worry about the worst case scenario, and we put, as much as we can to make sure in the event that you need it, it's in the agreement that, you're protected. So definitely for relying on the relationship and building relationship and having a reliable relationship with the partner, whoever you're working with, is definitely, I think it's a better approach than relying on the contract. It is definitely a last resort. In terms of answering your question, Tom, I think, making sure that both parties are on the same page is important. I know that sounds simple, but every now and then I see agreements where the parties are not exactly on the same page, but where sometimes we hope that the other side is not seeing the loophole in it. And for me, it's much better to be on the same page and kind of work out the issues and have an agreement where both parties are on the same page. It's better than trying to rely on loopholes that the other are not seeing. So not to say that that's what we do on a regular basis, but every now and then those issues come up, and I always advise my clients, rather than relying on that, I think you're much better to build a relationship where you can trust and be on the same page with your partner than rely on what's written and then have to litigate about it later.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Rory?
But
Yeah, so I think there are probably more assumptions in a marriage than you'd hope there would be in a contract. But as including the meaning of the word love, fidelity, all these things. But besides that, Oliver Hart will tell you, the Nobel Prize winner, that all contracts are in any event incomplete. So you shouldn't seek to put everything down in black and white. They're great preparation, for your business arrangement.
I'm sorry, Ori, but I'm going to interrupt. I'd like to say that no contract is the best contract, but that's just me, because then
I totally agree.
but,
exactly. There is no such thing, and so you should you know, the IACCM that Tom, you and I both know, this International Association of Contract and Commercial Management, they're at the moment trying to push standards as the way forward, because you know, that is a good way of sort of starting in the middle and trying to short circuit a little bit the pieces that you can. And technology will obviously help. Platform I'm building is supposed to allow you to integrate into your contract discussion, contract standards with one click, and then to be able to read them and decode any changes to those standards that have been made by the reviewer. So I think technology can help to bring you closer together by having sort of shared standards, and that doesn't really require you to start at the top and come to the end. But you know, but I would agree that the relationship is always.
Okay, and I know we're almost running out of time, so maybe it's going to be a last question or a second last question. But it feels to me, and from talking to lots of peers, that we're like in a pivotal time for supply chain and procurement teams to grasp the mantle and lead. Do you agree? And any advice for your peers or aspiring leaders in the procurement and supply chain teams on how to lead? So two-part question. Is this a pivotal moment? Second part, how should aspiring or leaders lead? Josh, how about you first? Because I know you've got some opinions on this.
Yeah, so I would say it seems like every year there's a new pivotal moment in supply chain to lead, right? The way I have described kind of my career is I said, you know, I was a naval officer. I was in the Navy for a while, and I took a supply chain course in my MBA, and my first job out of the Navy was a supply chain consulting job. So I stumbled on supply chain, and early on, it seemed like for the most part, a supply chain professional was someone that was usually a recovering engineer or a recovering accountant or a recovering HR person, someone in a job that got moved into supply chain, right? And you know, 20, 25 years ago, there were a handful of schools that offered supply chain degrees, and now there's tons of schools that offer supply chain degrees. And so I think through every crisis, companies are constantly reevaluating the structure of their organization. And a lot of it comes back to supply chain. A lot of it comes back to how do I get things from raw material source out to the customer, and what are the different pain points that could happen throughout that process, and how do I assess risk throughout that process, and how do I assess continuity of supply throughout that process. And you know, automotive's been doing this, as Shadura knows, for a long time. Automotive's got this, you know, automotive is probably a leading practitioners in terms of supply chain, at least in my mind. But it's a great opportunity for organizations to reassess you know, the quality of all that. So it's a pivotal moment. It's one of them. Is it the most pivotal? You know, one could argue maybe yes or no, right? To answer your question around leadership, if I think I understand your question correctly, you know, the biggest thing that I tell people with regards to leadership is, you know, around decision making, is the worst decision is no decision. Right. And so for supply chains, we've got to be able to stick our neck out there and make decisions and make recommendations and give guidance to our organizations on what to do, versus staying back on our heels and waiting to be told what to do. And so the biggest thing I'd say about leading is don't be afraid to stick your neck out there, make a decision. And if it happens to be the wrong decision, you know, take accountability for it, reassess, and then head down a different path later. But the worst decision is no decision.
Okay, great. And maybe I'm going to ask Shaq a slightly different question then. If you're a senior procurement person, perhaps in a small organization working right now, and you were your management in the past hasn't listened to you in regards to the importance of procurement supply chain, and you wanted to convince them of the importance, how would you get that message across? So
yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that the two main things that a person in a smaller organization can use to focus and show that the benefits of having a strong procurement organization is, number one, is when sales may be flattened or may be affected in a way that with a certain amount of uncertainty, then there's still certainty to help margin improvement and make sure that the supply base is ready to support. I think number two is, there's an elasticity of how access works. It's not only access to the product, but it's access to the patient. And it costs money to access customers. So in a smaller company, I think it's still, look, the way we're accessing maybe some of our customers, the way we're serving some of our customers, the cost to do that, are we getting the right value and being able to take and being able to serve them as efficiently as possible. Working to say, can we get closer to the customer? This is the benefits that we have to do that. Challenge the specific norms of doing that, whether it be in a company that's making plating materials, springs, making other types of small injection molded parts. At some point or another, sometimes you're actually having various steps to get to the customer. Those cost money. That takes away and derives from your margin. And the more of that margin you can get back, maybe the more you can invest into the people that you're trying to hire and actually ultimately protect, so that they come back and feel safe and can contribute in a very focused way to make sure the business runs well.
Okay, so really I'm hearing from you then is like link your role to profit and how it can help with
Yeah, I mean, everybody always looks at procurement and says, you guys are the savings masters. And I'm not necessarily sure we're just the savings masters. I think if you take a look at private equity, they hire a lot of people from procurement. Why? Because they found a company that has a specific niche, and they hire procurement people who know how to help broaden that niche, because they're looking for value, right? They're not looking for somebody who knows to come in and say, oh, magnesium is only good for steering knuckles. No, magnesium is good for a lot of different things. Appliances, it's good for maybe home, other type of home uses, but a person in procurement can do that. Use that person in procurement and present yourself as a person that knows how to use that product to maybe broaden your base and not be so specifically niche.
Fascinating. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Does anyone have any final remarks you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Tom, could I go back to your question around leadership very briefly? Because I think it's an important topic. We're offered with an opportunity for generational change because there are changes around that none of us, however long we've been in business, have experienced, right? So maybe maybe it's a leveler in terms of the generations, but I would say if you come into a business, however big it is, however small, and however important or unimportant your department is to the success of that business, you should probably think how it would survive a crisis of this kind, applying current processes. And if the answer is not very well, then you could use that gap to make yourself useful, I guess. A lot of older companies struggle to adapt and to keep up and to change. And if you're lucky enough, and this is quite a tech-centric answer, but if you're lucky enough to be a digital native, then many companies, the well-placed, experienced people aren't probably and don't know how to be. So a few years ago, I was in the face of such a situation. There I was attempting to bring about digital change in the huge reinsurance company I was working for, and a very young guy in my team, no experience in the technical aspect. He just came to me and said, listen, I really think that you, as someone who is trying to represent this change and so forth, you're carrying around a very old, almost broken BlackBerry, and it's not like 1995 anymore. So he just basically sent me out to buy an iPhone. So that kind of approach can be a great opportunity for younger people to to show quite a lot of leadership.
Okay, so you're making me think of Kodak, and if a world stops using physical film for cameras tomorrow, what happens to you? And if that's your company, there may be an opportunity for you to take leadership. Yeah.
Or even, you know, these topics we've been talking about now around how do you ensure continuity and how do you ensure continued teamwork and so forth. You know, you can think forward a bit and try and think, is there a better way? You know, a lot of the young people from social media, they have experience of how you can better contact people, create a vibe or create a feeling. So
yeah, and I think focus on the important things in your role as well. So, yeah. Okay, well, thank you all so much for your time. I know we ran over, it's very much appreciated, and I think the audience will get a lot out of this. I will, when we send this out to the world, I will link to your LinkedIn so people can reach out to you if they have follow-up questions, or they're happy to reach out to me. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, Tom. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.